So here's our first section. Number 1, Jesus may offend the Pharisee in me. He might. He loves you and I just as much as he loved those Pharisees. But you see, Jesus wants to call reality like it really is. Many of you know that my wife was sick over Christmas break, and it was pretty bad, man. And we were concerned because the doctor said if her ribs continue to hurt the way that they have been, it's pneumonia for sure, and you guys need to take some drastic next steps. And so we were a little bit freaked out when her ribs continued to hurt more and more and more as she was getting more and more sick. But as she actually began to get better, her ribs over here weren't getting any better. There was more and more pain, and we were like, what is going on? And we thought, is it just, her lungs are hurting her in some way? Is she just probably it's sore muscles, right? I mean, that's probably what it is. We were imagining, we couldn't see what was going on really inside of her. All we could do is just interpret the facts as best we understood them. Well, then she went to see Dr. Nick. And Dr. Nick let her know right away, Kenzie, you've got a rib out of place. Now, she could have said, Dr. Nick, you're a fool. I don't receive that. I don't have a rib out of place. This is just sore muscles. But wisely, she received it from her good brother-in-law, and they have begun the healing process. But so often, the Pharisee in us will defend things that we don't want to be true, even if we're defending something that is not reality. Let's see what happened to these Pharisaical religious leaders. Now remember, these guys have been to all the finest schools. They are the spiritual leaders of their community. They look at Jesus and they're like, you haven't even been to the official rabbi's schools, Rabbi. Who are you to tell us what's what? And yet here's what Jesus says to him. Let's take a listen. Matthew 15, verse 1. Some Pharisees and teachers of religious law now arrived from Jerusalem to see Jesus. They asked him, why do your disciples disobey our age-old tradition? For they ignore our tradition of ceremonial hand-washing before they eat. Jesus replied, as he often did, with a question, why do you, by your traditions, violate the direct commandments of God? So Jesus immediately shoots back. First of all, Pharisees, my disciples aren't disobeying anything God actually said. They're just disobeying what you say. Verse 4, for instance, God says, honor your father and mother, and anyone who speaks disrespectfully of father or mother must be put to death. But you say it's all right for people to say to their parents, sorry, I can't help you, for I vowed to give to God what I would have given to you. Okay, let's pause right there, a little bit of context. In Jesus' time, in that culture, it was a big deal. You had to honor your father and mother, and there was no retirement accounts, there's no social security or anything. And so as your parents aged, it was on you to take care of them, often by providing for their needs and giving them stuff that could even give them money. But the Pharisees found a loophole. They said, well, if I really like my stuff, if I really like this vase, if I really like this piece of furniture over here, instead of giving it to my parents, I think they've got enough. You can just say, hey, dedicate it to God. Hey, this is God's chair. I'm sorry, Mom. Sorry. God's chair. God's chair. And so they would just call God's chair on them, and they would get to keep their stuff. And Jesus is saying, okay, so here you are rebuking my disciples for not doing what you say is really important, even though God never said that. And yet what God did say, honor your mother and father, you're completely trying to find a workaround for. Yeah, he's saying, y'all jacked up. But you say, verse 5, it is all right for people to say to their parents, sorry, I can't help you, for I've vowed to give to God what I would have given to you. In this way, you say you don't need to honor their parents. You say they don't need to honor their parents, and so you cancel the word of God for the sake of your own tradition. Praise God, little circulation going away. Let me hold this here. I'm sure many of you noticed these are pretty light weights. I was thankful that Dan Manahan let me borrow his. Verse 7. Verse 7, you hypocrites. Isaiah was right when he prophesied about you, for he wrote, these people honor me with their lips, but their hearts are far from me. Their worship, now listen to reality. Jesus is about to say reality. Their worship is a farce, for they teach man-made ideas as commands from God. Then Jesus called to the crowd to come in here. Listen, he said, and try to understand. It's not what goes into your mouth that defiles you. You are defiled by the words that come out of your mouth. Then the disciples came to him and asked him, now check it out. Do you realize you offended the Pharisees by what you said? Now Jesus was pointing to what Isaiah had prophesied, what he said about his own time and about this time. And he was saying, it's true, these spiritual leaders like those in Isaiah's time, their worship is a farce. It's all exterior. They're not actually trying to connect with God at all. It's just a bunch of religious rules taught by men. And the disciples were worried that these Pharisees were offended. And it's not that Jesus doesn't care about those Pharisees. He loves them. But it was on him to point out truth for the sake of others and for the sake of those Pharisees. Maybe like Joseph of Arimathea or Nicodemus, whose hearts were genuinely drawn to Christ even though they were Pharisees. So again, our enemy in this particular passage, it's always important to ask when we're studying the Bible, who is Jesus saying is the bad guy or the enemy or the thing I'm not supposed to do? He's not saying the Pharisees are the bad guy in this particular text. He's saying the Pharisees' wrong response to the fact that Jesus is now offending them is the bad guy. Let's talk about this word offense, can we? See, Jesus' agenda was to uphold the truth and preserve it for you and I. But this word offended is really the Greek word scandalizo. It's translated, yes, to be offended. It's also translated to turn away, to stumble, to sting in the heart. Now here's where it gets trippy. It means to set a trap. Now let me ask you a question. Who sets the trap? For real, my friends, you know this, many of you, and some of you, you're just hearing it for the first time, but it's true that Jesus believed in real spiritual opposition from the kingdom of darkness. There's really a bad guy out there who's invisible, who's trying to get all of us to walk away from God. And he's setting little traps, little offenses. Why? So he can harden the heart. And harden the heart away from God and from God's people. And to get you and I to be very weighted down. So that our responses to life ultimately are very different. This offense is literally a trap. So here's what the question is not. We're not even asking the question, is it legitimate for someone to offend you? We're saying people are going to offend you. The question is, how will you deal with that offense? How will you deal with that stumbling when it comes? Will you recover? Or will you fall flat on your face and walk around in it and be like Joe and tell everybody about it and pull it out on the coffee table and show it to people? Instead of asking, why would he offend me like this? They should have asked, is there any reality here that I can profit from? That's a harder thing. Can I just let everybody know? This is like a level 5 maturity message. This is hard. Responding to offenses the right way. You do not learn this in Sandbox. This is one of like the last things to get saved, man. It's this in your pocketbook. It is how are you dealing with offenses? And what makes it even harder? Sometimes it's not a legitimate offense. It's not a legitimate critique. Someone is giving you some information, and it's not Jesus, it's somebody else. And they're saying, here's what I think about you. This is what you should do. But the truth is, God's not saying that. You're really not doing that wrong. There's nothing wrong there. And yet they're saying that it is. And this can be, that's what's hard is because there's an inner sense of justice. You're like, if this were even right, like that would be easier, but you're telling me it's wrong and it's not wrong. I'm not doing that wrong. So it takes a high degree of maturity. But I want to challenge you with this question. Is it possible that even in the midst of this stumbling that is inevitable, offenses are going to happen? Is it possible that the Lord wants you and me to grow in our sense of security in him? In our ability to just be gracious? Now, here's the deal, because we come to Jesus Christ and we get his free gift of forgiveness. But he doesn't want to just forgive us, he wants to transform us. And the same grace that you were shown, it's actually his mission that you and I become little grace givers. But you can't have grace with people unless they do something to offend you. That's the only place it's actually practiced. It's easy to have grace in a room alone, but you actually have to have grace with people. You have to develop that muscle of having grace. Is it also possible the Lord might be trying to grow the virtue of humility in you and I? That he might be trying to grow the virtue of don't defend yourself. They're wrong, but don't defend yourself. That's exactly what Jesus did, isn't it? He didn't defend himself. Is it possible, too, that the Lord wants you to, like Romans 12:21 says, that he wants you to not be overcome by evil, but to overcome evil with good? What would that look like? So someone's dissing you, someone has offended you, and man, you're ready, dude, you're ready to lay into them. I got Bible right here, man, you're an idiot, you're wrong. But is it possible he wants you to sow positive speech about your critic? That he wants you to speak well of them. For you to keep growing, yeah, they're not going to grow much by just criticizing you, but you're going to grow as you lean into, I'm going to bless them. I'm going to speak really highly of them. I'm going to allow this to be a lesson in sensitivity to me. Because I know that someday I might be in a situation where I'm tempted to diss someone else the way that they dissed me, but I'm going to remember this. I'm even going to write it down in a little journal. Jacked up stuff not to do to anybody. That's the name of the journal. But I'm going to grow from it. I'm going to learn to be sensitive where this person is being insensitive. And then for my Frozen fans, is it possible that the Lord wants to help you just let it go? Is that possible? Some of us, man, we are holding on to this stuff. And it's weighing us down. Now, I'm 36 right now. Let's pretend that 3 of these major offenses in life is typical, is average. If I just stay alive, how many more will I add up over the years? By the time I'm 50, what if I have 10 more of these things that are just hanging off of me? And I'm trying to do something for God. I'm trying to preach or whatever, but it's getting harder and harder as time goes by because I'm taking these offenses with me. It's still burned into my heart. I haven't let it go. And I'm a different person now. See, now I see dog poop where there's only bird nests. Because I didn't let it go. And maybe the Lord is just leading us to really just not care so much what people think. Galatians 1:10, for am I now seeking the favor of men or of God? Am I striving to please men? If I were still trying to please men, I would not be a bondservant of Christ. Hello, Christians. Hello, Christians. Hey, you still trying to please men all the time? Check it. According to the Apostle Paul, that's a quick way to jack up your service to Christ. That's a quick way to get it impure. If you're always concerned what everybody thinks, now focus on what he thinks. Care about other people. Try to be courteous. Try to be sweet, but recognize nobody else is God. Only he's God. Now what about when it is a legitimate critique or it is a legitimate sharping? Because in Jesus' case it was. But these Pharisees, they were looking at self. They were looking at their degrees. They were looking at, you can't be right because I already know how it is. I already understand the way it is. when someone brings you potentially a word of critique, is there inside of you an instant reaction? It's like, whoa, you're wrong. Just so you know, you're wrong. That's not how I already understand it. I think that's very normal. I think that's probably where most of us are. If we're going to develop the virtue of recoverability, I don't need you to get rid of that entirely. I just think it might be a good idea to give that thing inside us that is quick to defend over to Jesus and say, Lord, would you help me just be slower to speak? Would you help me to just listen a little further and not reject counsel and not reject coaching out of hand? Because it could be these Pharisees were very convinced they were right. And I could also be very convinced that I'm right and not be right. Maybe you're trying to coach me, Jesus. Maybe you're trying to redirect me. Can I give you some examples? When I was in college, when I began my undergrad, I was a musical theater major. And I did that for about a year. And I loved it because I was a singer. Like that's what I'd, in my young life, that was part of my identity. I was like, dude, I'm a musician and I sing and I get on stage and do all this. And one of my advisors came to me after about a year and said, hey, buddy, we're going to take you out of the musical theater program and just, yeah, I wasn't laughing at the time, but it's funny now. And we're going to just have you do straight acting. And I was like, what are you talking about, man? I'm like, I sing. They're like, you can sing, but your music theory is not good enough to stay in this program. Your rock and acting, do that. Because I won't lie to you, I walked away from that meeting just TO'd in my heart. Who's he to tell me? My parents paying the money. I don't know why he gets to tell me what kind of track I get to take. And guys, as I look back now, it's so clear to me that was the Lord sovereignly directing my steps in that moment. Now, this guy wouldn't have claimed to be a Christ follower. He didn't think I'm an agent of God and I'm directing you which way to go. It was just God's sovereign moving through an authority in my life saying, you thought you were doing this, but you're really going to do this. And it was an offense in my heart. And thankfully, the Holy Spirit was already dealing with me even at that young age. And there's a lot I did wrong back then, just like now. But he slowly began to help me understand you can't hold this offense in your heart. Just trust me that I'm doing this right. But in the moment, it was very hard. What about you? Is it hard for you when people presume to correct you? I think for many of us, it probably is. And that's okay as long as we get back on the track of recoverability and improving in our responses.